You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. My guest today is John Lewis. He's the founder of what's called the Virtual Legacy. We're going to talk about some real estate topics, including short-term rentals, and to find out about his Virtual Legacy company. So welcome, John.
Thank you for having me, Richard. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, tell me a bit about your background first.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana. I joke that's where all the crazy people are from. They just kind of spread out over time. So growing up there, you want to make it out one of two ways. It's either sports or entertainment. I originally chose the sports route and played college basketball. That journey came to an end. I fell short, literally. I'm 5'8", so I was a point guard. It was tough to make it to the NBA, and that's when I pivoted into the world of business.
So you weren't like Muggsy Bogues, right? I guess he was 5'8" and he was the shortest. I'm 5'8" too, so yeah, I'm going to say Muggsy Bogues Club.
Yes, sir. Yeah, Muggsy was special. Nate Robinson, those guys are definitely the exception to the rule. So, but yeah, for me, I cracked the code at 5'8", and that kind of took me to the world of business. I knew I didn't want to be an employee or work for someone else. I had tried it. I was working 10 times harder than my peers, and they were making the same amount, and that didn't sit right with me. So I looked into the world of business, got a mentor, sold my PlayStation, my clothes, my shoes to buy my first mentorship program. And yeah, I was committed, man. I was like, anything that I do pretty intensely. So I was like, I have to commit, have to make this happen. And it ended up paying off for me. 10 years later now, I've built two companies to 7 figures. One is the Virtual Legacy, which we'll talk a little bit more about today. It's an online company helping real estate investors to develop education. And the other is my construction company, where we specialize in disaster recovery. So after storms, after storms, we'll go in and help to rebuild. We rebuilt a little over 150 homes down in Puerto Rico after that storm. So excited to chat more.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't mind, let's talk about that first.
Yeah.
How are you able to help people? Like, how do you get funding and how do you identify who to help?
Yeah, so I can do a little quick education on government contracting. So the way that it works is when a storm hits a U.S. territory or U.S. state, the government will declare it a disaster. The moment they declare it a disaster, they release funding to that area. So in the case of Puerto Rico, I believe it was something like $4.4 billion was allocated to rebuilding Puerto Rico. And then from there, the government just appoints a few companies that are tasked with rebuilding the island. Those companies are called prime contractors. They're really big, like billion-dollar companies. And they're tasked with the job of finding workers to go help rebuild the island. And that's where we came into play in my company. We partnered with one of those companies. And like I said, we rebuilt a little over 150 homes down in Puerto Rico after the storm.
But you being a small company, I would assume, how did you get a toehold in there? Do they only deal usually with large ones, or what did you do?
Yeah, so the government usually goes directly to the larger companies, but from there it's all relationship based. So growing up in New Orleans, of course, Katrina was one of the most devastating storms to ever hit the country. I believe it's still the worst natural disaster that ever hit the States. That was horrible, of course, but one of the things that it allowed for was for us to make connections in the disaster recovery space. And once you make connections, it's kind of like a fraternity. So everybody kind of calls you on a I know you basis. And so that's kind of how we got into that world originally, was after Katrina. And we had those connections established. So now when a storm hits and one of those bigger companies get a contract, we're on the short list of companies that they'll call to come help and rebuild.
Are they going to have you rebuild Ukraine? I'm just kidding.
No, not it.
You never know.
Only U.S.-based areas can get the government funding, unfortunately. It sucks because, like, to give an example, when that storm hit Puerto Rico got funding, but the Dominican was not funded because they're not U.S. territory. So, yeah, very interesting world for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, tell me about the Virtual Legacy. What's that about?
Yeah, so that's partnering with real estate investors, who I call like real life successful. Of course, there's a lot of people online that claim they've done certain things. What we like to do is really research the people that we partner with and make sure that they've had real life success. So a lot of my clients have built 7, 8 figure, all the way up to 10-figure portfolios. I have a few billionaire clients, but they range from multifamily, real estate, to wholesaling, to fix and flip, Airbnb, you name it. Have a lot of different specialties. So we just partner with those experts and help them to build out education so they can teach others what they've done.
Okay. And then what has been your focus in the real estate world? Like, how did you build yours? Was it short-term rentals? Was it long-term rentals, flips?
Yep, great question. So I started off with wholesaling, and I always recommend that for people. And the reason why, I think it's a very foundational step in the real estate game. It really helps you to understand, number one, how to generate leads. I think that a lot of people get into deals in real estate that they shouldn't because they feel desperation. They'll see one deal, it is the deal or bust, and that makes them kind of like overcompensate when it comes to their numbers. So when you learn wholesaling, you really learn how to generate leads consistently. And a lot of times you're finding deals that are off market. So you're not competing with other people. So for me, the first course I ever took in real estate was like probably 9 years ago now by a guy named Sean Terry. He's a really big wholesale guy. Flip to Freedom, I think, was his program. And that program just basically teaches you how to go around, put up bandit signs. And so here I was, I must have been like 20 years old at the time, running around St. Petersburg and Tampa area, putting up bandit signs at like midnight because you technically aren't supposed to be doing that, and basically telling people to call me. And that's the first business that I built in the real estate world, was just a wholesaling company. And that's really how I got my start. And from there, it turned into found a place that I wanted to keep. I didn't want to wholesale it. And I did a fix and flip on a place in St. Petersburg Beach. This is crazy. It was like 8 years ago. I actually got that place for like $185,000. It was a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment on St. Pete Beach. The reason that's so crazy is because you can't get anything close to that price now in these days. Yeah. But for me, as a young guy, I flipped it and I sold it for like $250,000. And I thought, man, I just cashed out. I'm balling down. And now fast forward to now, that same property is worth about $700,000. So in hindsight, wow. I probably should have kept the deal, but that was my first fix and flip. And then now I've really ventured into more of the short-term rental space. I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. So we're working on a short-term rental in Indian Rocks Beach, and I have another one in Indiana as well.
Yeah, short-term rentals, essentially Airbnbs for people that don't know. I mean, I know it's not just Airbnbs, but is that a way just to, for people that don't know anything about STRs to just think about it initially?
Yeah, we use them interchangeably because most people don't know the difference. But you're right, short-term rental is just considered anything that's 30 days or less. So technically, there can be other types of short-term rentals. Airbnb is just a platform, but Airbnb is the most common platform that people use for their short-term rental business. So we have short-term rentals specifically, and we use Airbnb as the main platform to put those up on. But there's other platforms like VRBO that you can put your property on, and other ways to market as well. You can even build a private site and market through a private site as well.
Sure. Yeah, I heard, I don't know, the past few months that short-term rentals are not looking so good. So, I mean, what's your assessment of like the current market conditions for them? Is it a space where newbies should maybe stay away, or do you think it's all going well, or what do you see?
I think a lot of it has to do with risk tolerance, number one, and then having the proper knowledge, number two. Warren Buffett has a statement: when others are fearful, be greedy. When others are greedy, be fearful. I think that this can apply here as long as you know where to be and where not to be. So as an example, one of the big reasons that short-term rentals are coming over under heavy scrutiny is because of regulations. It's not necessarily that they don't make money, it's that the regulations are just making it really tough to make money in certain areas. So one of the ways that I kind of get around that is I look for properties that are in areas that are unincorporated. This is super popular in areas like Colorado, and there's places that are unincorporated everywhere, but Colorado especially has a lot of just open land. And all that means if it's unincorporated is it's not governed by a municipality. So it's a fancy way of saying they can't come and shut your business down or fine you. So that's one to it, is just finding areas that are not heavily regulated, which that's one of the, like I said, one of the biggest challenges right now to have.
Like not New York. I've heard, like an example, I guess New York is what is stipulated that you can't have a short-term rental. The minimum stay is 30 days plus. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yep. The city just passed a new rule, which pretty much effectively just shut all of those short-term rentals down. Now, there's a lot of people still doing it illegally. Of course, I don't recommend that, and I'll never recommend anything that's not legal, but there's a lot of people that are still up and operating just kind of under the vest. But yeah, they effectively put those people out of business in New York City.
Right. So what are some of the things that someone that's interested in short-term rentals should know? And then we'll get into like, what makes a good one, a viable one versus a not viable one. But right now, so you mentioned unincorporated areas, you're more likely to be safe. What are some other factors people should look for to identify good candidates?
Yep. I think another thing to really pay attention to is that at the end of the day, you can't look at short-term rentals, in my opinion, just as a piece of real estate. You have to truly look at it as a business and an experience. Fun fact, the owner of Airbnb actually came out and made a statement about how they're really going to start prioritizing experiences. That's why if you look on the Airbnb app, there's a whole tab that's just called experiences, because to be honest, that's how short-term rentals can separate themselves, is people are looking for a vacation. They're looking to have fun. If you think of the hotels that you like going to, like with your family, if you're going on a family vacation, you don't want just something where you can lay your head down. Preferably, you want something that's an experience, like something that has attractions or attractions close to it. So when you think of your Airbnb, I believe a good one thinks of it the same way. It's not just how can I give someone a place to lay their head. It's how can I give someone a unique experience that they won't forget, and hopefully create a repeat customer that'll want to keep coming back and experiencing that over and over again. I think you can do that multiple ways. Sometimes you can do that by the way that you design the property itself and the amenities that you have on the property itself. Sometimes an experience is more about a location. Like I know a short-term rental that's up by the Northern Lights. It's a little tiny glass, tiny home, but it's see-through, but people can go there and look at the Northern Lights. And last time I looked, don't quote me on this, but I believe people were paying somewhere around $6,000 for a 3-night stay for a little tiny glass Airbnb that's a tiny home, but it's because the experience is seeing the Northern Lights. So that's a perfect example of how experience trumps just like a place to lay your head at.
Well, I mean, even if you go to an unincorporated area, let's say in Colorado, I would guess they would tend to be more rural. You could do stuff if you had skylights in the house where you could like see the stars, or if there was a deck people could go out on and see the stars, or in the Smoky Mountains, I saw some with like hot tubs and mountain views. So I'm starting to see what you're saying, some of these experiences.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we're looking at one in Colorado right now. It's not finalized yet, but we're looking to have a Clydesdale farm. So my wife's uncle actually has a full-out Clydesdale farm, which Clydesdales are the horses, the Budweiser horses, for those of you that need a visual of that. But his Clydesdales are so close to the property that we basically want it to be where people can come pet the Clydesdales, ride on the back of the Clydesdales, things like that. They'll pull them in like a carriage and things like that. So just an attraction where people can experience that, and then also experience the Sand Dunes National Park, which is really close to that area as well. So that's another example of like an experience people can have at an Airbnb.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, for a while, Airbnbs seem to get, I don't know, not mercenary, but in a way, there's some I've stayed in where some bedrooms are locked and you got to pay extra to unlock them. I've been in ones where like the cleaning fee was like $200 and they still want you to put everything in the dryer and the washer and do the sheets, the laundry, the garbage. And like, why would I stay here if I have to do all the work and pay a cleaning fee? So it just seems like some operators, I guess, are not doing so well.
Oh yeah, some operators are absolutely horrible, but you have to look at it like this. That's what creates the opportunity for the good ones. So I believe that those people will be weeded out. People will stop staying at their properties. They're going to get bad reviews. They'll be out of business in the next few years. And then what's going to be left is just the good operators. So really, it's a way of weeding out the competition and kind of clearing the field. And I believe that's what's happening in that space right now.
So what are some factors people should avoid when looking at STRs if they're new at it?
Well, I think regulations are huge. So me personally, I wouldn't be looking in like a major city, any major city really. Of course, make sure you pay attention to the ones that have already banned short-term rentals. You definitely don't want to buy your property with hopes of making it a short-term rental there. But past there, just staying away from big cities in general, I think is a safe bet. So do your research from a regulation standpoint is number one. I would say the second thing to pay attention to is an area where people are likely to travel, because once again, it's short-term rentals are also where people want a vacation. So you're not looking at places where people are going to come and stay for an extended period of time. It's like where people are going to come and visit and have a good time. So I would definitely look for areas like that. I guess the other factor that we like to look at is easily accessible. So hopefully an airport is somewhat near. They don't have to like drive 3 or 4 hours to get there. The only caveat to this is if you have a mountain home experience. If people know it's a mountain home experience, they assume they're going to have to drive into the mountain, so you can kind of get away with it. But outside of that, you want to be relatively close to an airport so people don't have to travel far to get to your property.
Yeah, I had some where I had to you had to pay extra for parking, or you couldn't park, you had to go down the street. I know you just got to find something somewhere to park. All kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely a wrong way to do this for sure. But if you do it the right way, then it's a great opportunity.
What about in terms of the the finances of the property? The NOI. What I've heard from some investors is like if a property is not going to make it as a regular long-term rental, don't do it, because if you do the STR route and it doesn't work, now you're in trouble. You're in a heavy negative cash flow situation. So numbers wise, what would you look for to see if it's a deal or not?
Well, I think what you're kind of alluding to is having multiple exit strategies, which I think in a perfect world, yes, I think that's a great idea. I actually have a client who believes the polar opposite. So what she believes, I'll just pull from her train of thought, is instead of trying to make your property work in multiple ways, go full in on the short-term rental route. So as an example, she has a few properties up in Michigan. I'll give you the numbers behind her. So she bought it for $350,000 was the purchase price on the property. The average take home that they have per month profit after all expenses, including, of course, there's high season, there's low season, there's obviously revenue versus profit. So I'm talking profit here. Money they put in their pocket is $5,000 on average per month in their pocket. She believes that one of the reasons they were able to do that is because they went all in on making it a true short-term rental. They didn't try to design it in a way where if the short-term rental doesn't work out, we can pivot to something else. They went all in on that business, and her thought process is this: $5,000 a month in profit is $60,000 per month, or $60,000 per year, right? So if this short-term rental can operate for 3 to 4 years at that rate, it basically pays for itself at that point. If she has to pivot in 4 to 5 years, she's pivoting now after making $240,000 after 4 years of running this as a business. So she believes go all in on making a short-term rental, maximize the profits while the opportunity is here. And if you have to pivot later, you maximize the business's potential. The other thing is, as long as you buy a good property, you can always sell that property as well, right? So you want to evaluate the property from a standpoint of, will it appreciate? Is it going to be in a good area? Things like that. But nobody says you have to keep this property if it no longer can be a short-term rental. As long as you bought a good property, you can always sell that property if it doesn't work out. So that's kind of her mindset behind it, and she's done really well in the space.
Right, but what I would think would shape the market are not the people that are the best at it, but the people that are just okay at it. So I would, in the short-term rental space, I would guess that, not every operator is responsible financially, is a real business person. So in times like now where interest rates are high, the market's kind of okay. I know there's low inventory and stuff, but I would think it would be the average person that doesn't go all in, doesn't go whole hog. And then when there's trouble, they're like, oh, this was a bad idea. Forget it. I'm selling. I'm out of here. What does that do to the short-term rental market? Are you seeing any of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say first and foremost, if you want to be an average investor, don't go the short-term rental route. That would be my honest take on that. I would start with long-term rentals. You can even venture into mid-term rentals. Those take a little less work. They're not run as much as a business. My scale is kind of like this. Long-term rental, in my opinion, has the least potential for income of the three, but it's the easiest to get into and the easiest to manage with a good property management company. And the scale just kind of goes up from there. So mid-term, higher earning potential, but more work. Short-term, highest earning potential, but most work and most risk. So that's kind of the scale. So if you want to be an average investor or don't want to put a ton of time into it or learn what it takes to be a top business owner in that world, I just wouldn't touch short-term rentals at all. I'd just focus on long-term rentals for now, get some cash flow coming in. I definitely think that's the safer route. But to answer your question about how the market is being impacted, I think it's exactly what I mentioned earlier, where a lot of people are being weeded out. The people that aren't fully committed to really running this like a business and being full in are not making money. So they're having to exit that market. And what's going to be left is the high end people who really have taken this seriously and really want to build long-term, short-term rentals that are going to be here for years.
Okay. Well, look, if I had two people, one was just okay, a decent STR operator, and one was really, really good, what would be the difference in the two? What do the top people do that run it really well, like a business, and what do the mediocre ones do?
Yep. So it really can boil down to two things. Design and management are going to be the two biggest varying factors in a super successful property from an average or bad property. Some of the nightmares that you've already kind of told me about with your experiences, I would contribute to management, and those things leave a bad taste in your mouth, right? So I think that there's a standard of management that's just expected that you have to meet, but then there's a step past there where you can actually go into the customer experience. Small things like I have another one of my clients, she has a property that's in the cherry capital of the US. She's up in Michigan in Traverse City. And when you go into her property, she has like cherry flavored whiskey laying out. She has like cherry themed everything laying out for you to sample. She has the guy to take a helicopter tour through the leaves changing. In Michigan in the fall, the leaves change and it's beautiful. So it's not just like, here's your place, here's the key, good luck, right? It's like an actual full-on experience that's really well thought out. That type of management can lead to obviously amazing reviews. It'll probably lead to people coming back to that property, and it allows for a charge more because people know they're getting a VIP experience. So that's how management can be different. And the other side is design. Instead of just having a property that looks just like a long-term rental, basically bed thrown up, like couch thrown up, it's livable, but it's nothing special. A lot of the top people will really invest in design and really invest in making the place unique. Adding things like not just making it look beautiful, but even adding amenities like jacuzzis, like gaming systems so that people can play like the old arcade games, just adding things like that and investing in the property so that once again, the property completely stands out from other properties that you will look at. So I would say those two things are the biggest variables. If you invest in design and you have great management, people will stay at your property versus any other property that they could stay at.
What are some of the unanticipated costs or things that you have to do that people just are, again, people that are new to STRs, what are they like, oh man, I didn't know that. Like what catches them? And they're like, oh.
I wouldn't say that there's so many other hidden expenses than you would have with a normal property, to be honest. I think one misconception people have with short-term rentals is, okay, more people are going in all the time, so the property is going to have more wear and tear than someone that's a long-term renter. I've actually found that not to be true, because when you think about it, like with a short-term renter, somebody might stay in my place for 3 days, right? And then after that, after 3 days, I have to have somebody come in and clean the whole thing, right? Oh, the long-term, they'll be in there for a year, possibly, before someone comes in and cleans it. So I would actually argue the maintenance on a short-term rental is a lot better than even a long-term rental because you can get to problems quicker. You're cleaning multiple times per week, and the upkeep is just a lot better. So
you know what it's similar to? It's like a taxi. I drove, like 25 years ago, I drove a taxi for like 3 months. And a lot of the taxis had like 500 to 800,000 miles on them. And I thought, oh my God, how do these things run? And they said they get oil changes every week. They get maintained constantly, even though they get driven a lot. So that's why this sounds like the same.
Exactly. Exact same concept. I wouldn't say it's worse than a long-term rental when it comes to maintenance. If anything, I would say it's actually a little bit better.
Interesting. Okay. What are some of the difficulties, though, that, again, catch people off guard? Do people get just tenants that are just completely unreasonable, like crazy monsters? Or, do you get people that trash the place? Like, what is the behavior of the people that you take in, like, versus a long-term rental?
For sure. So there's a right and wrong way to do this as well. So nightmare scenario, if you don't know what you're doing, of course, you can attract partiers, you can attract ragers, you can attract people that like tear up the place. That is definitely one thing that is possible. One of the ways that you can kind of combat that is the length of stay that you have for the property. So a lot of times partiers and people that just want to pop in and have fun want to rent a place out for a day or two, but they don't really want to rent it out any longer than that. So one hack to not attracting those type of people is making your minimum stay a little bit longer. So people have to stay at least 3 days, or at least, 3 is usually the maximum you want to go to. But that way you attract more families and like people traveling for a true purpose than partiers. So that is one possibility, but there's ways to get around it. The other ways to get around it is by making your property a high-end property. Because once again, someone who just wants to party and trash the place, they're not looking for the most expensive property usually. They usually are looking for those lower-end properties that they could just have a place to party. So if your property is on the more high-end side and they have to have a longer stay, you're less likely to attract those type of people. However, that is one possibility. So that's one possible nightmare scenario. The other big thing is neighbors. So you have to get neighbors on board with the fact that you have a short-term rental. A lot of times they can be a bigger headache than even the clientele that you're attracting if you don't build a relationship. So yeah, building the relationship.
What's happened with neighbors? Like, what's an example?
Well, just neighbors not being happy at the fact that people are coming in and out of the property, right? Because at the end of it, if they could choose someone who just lives there versus like different people that they don't know coming in and out, a lot of times they would rather somebody that they know, right? And could build a relationship. So just getting them on board with the fact that people will be coming in and out, people will be parking their car. They might not necessarily know these people, but just ensuring them that these people are heavily vetted, there's background checks, they're not dangerous people. Just overcoming that whole curve with neighbors sometimes can be a challenge.
Yeah. So how do you vet someone? You know, you have your listing, someone, I guess, there's some that you can auto book. I remember that. And then there's some that, you have to get the owner's permission first. So what's been observed by you, with those two scenarios? Like, how do you vet people? What do you look for?
Yeah, I think so. Their Airbnb profile is going to have a rating on them too, if there's any like past history there. So you'll be able to check that out. Past there, it's preferred that you have a contract and a process with them even outside of Airbnb for protection, because Airbnb was designed to help the customer, not necessarily to help you as the provider. So it makes sense to have your own separate contracts, waivers, things like that people have to sign and go through just to make sure that you're properly protected. And then if you want to be even more extreme, I do have a client. I don't do this, but I have a client who does this, she does her own separate background checks as well.
Right.
So it's something that you can implement too. I mean, it's your business. You can do as much or little as you choose to. Of course, the more you do like that, sometimes it can make turn people off to want to stay there. So you want to be careful and have a fine balance. But I mean, you can do as much due diligence as you feel necessary because it's your business. So
I guess, you go too hardcore, the person says, "Oh, forget it, you're ridiculous."
Right.
But if they don't do anything, then you can have a big problem.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's definitely a fine balance there.
What about furnishing them initially? Does it go by square foot? Like, what are some ballpark numbers so people would know how much it is to kit out their Airbnb?
Yep. So this is where my statement of design being a huge variable comes into play. So I'll give you the example of my client, and I'm using a few client examples because they've been doing this a little bit longer and have a lot more numbers for me to give you. But one of my clients, the one in Michigan that I told you about, that bought a place for $350,000-ish and was making about $5,000 profit per month. She put about $80,000 into that property, design and amenity wise, including like the jacuzzi, the couches that she got, the beds she got, the overall design of the property, all in was about $80,000, which is a big number, right? Like, most people won't put that much or even think to put that much into a property. But what it translates into is she's always booked out. She's known as one of the top premier properties to stay at. She's not even close to her competition who just bought a place and put the minimum into it. Her place just looks so much better, right? And so that's what I was kind of alluding to when I talk about like how design can be a major variable. Is like, if you're willing to go all in and really understand what you're going to get back from putting so much into it, you're willing to take that risk, it'll separate you from the competition. But a lot of people, they don't have that mentality. They just want to put the minimum in and hope that they can get to break even as quickly as possible.
Okay. Sure. Are there any other rules of thumb in terms of like, fixing stuff up enough so that it's a decent short-term rental, but not going like crazy?
Can you clarify kind of what you mean by that? Like, if you're talking about like if there's a plumbing issue or if there's an issue in the toilet?
Like, like if I have a 2-bedroom condo and I need to get it ready for short-term rental, Like, on average, let's say it's 1,000 square feet. Could I get a quick estimate on how much it would be to get that sucker ready, to furnish it with the beds and everything, and get everything ready to turn it into a short-term rental, like a low, medium, or high finish where it's done okay, or it's done decently, or it's done really, really well?
Yeah, let me pull up. This will be very, very quick. The rough numbers I remember, and I'm trying to fact check myself, that my designer gave me would be like a low-end finish would be about $10 per square foot. Medium would be anywhere from $15 to $20 per square foot. And I believe high-end would be anywhere from like 40 to 50 per square foot. That's not a definite rule, and I'm estimating because I'm trying to remember if that's the exact numbers, but that's around the ballpark of the different ranges. So around 10 low end, 15 to 20 medium range, and 40 to 50 is higher end range.
Okay. So for that theoretical 2-bedroom, 1,000 square foot, it can go anywhere from like 10,000 up to 40, 50,000. Depending on how you want to do it. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So yeah, the properties are cleaned. Do you have the cleaners kind of, what are best practices there? Do they have a checklist on what to do? Do they get rewarded if they find problems? Like what should you do there?
My best advice for you there is to find a good property management company that handles all that for you. Unless you're just going to be obsessed about it, even if you know the insides and outs of it, which, like I said, I have clients that this is their full-time thing. It's all they do with their life is Airbnb, and they still have good property management companies that they outsource to. Just because, if you choose the right company, they'll pay for themselves with a level of management. And a good company will be super detailed with all of those things that you're mentioning. Checklists of everything a cleaner should do to a T. They'll find the best cleaners. They'll manage the best cleaners. They'll make sure that if for some reason you lose a cleaner, that cleaner is replaced. A good management company will also make sure when it comes to instructions for the person to get into the place, not only are they written out, but they'll even have video tutorials of everything and every little detail. So my best advice there would be to find a property management company, do your research, find one you can trust. But if you find a good company, they'll take care of all of that stuff for you.
Okay. All right. Any, just for fun, any crazy Airbnb stories of success or disaster, or really strange things that happened, or unbelievable things that happened?
Yeah, I think the craziest story that I've heard in the Airbnb space is one of my clients has their cleaner, one of their cleaners was actually ex-con, but they were a neighbor of theirs. So they had built trust and everything like that, and they would have them just go check in on the place. Well, this time the guy went and checked in on the place, and some of the guests were still there, and it's into an altercation. Long story short, now she was left with this ex-con that's her neighbor, who she now has to go and fire, and also has to refund the guests because of the altercation that happened. And she's terrified because she's I have to fire this guy, but he's also my neighbor. He's also an ex-con. Very, very weird situation there. So that was pretty crazy. And then the other crazy story just had to do with the tenant. The tenant actually stayed at the Airbnb, dirtied a bunch of dishes just naturally because you're staying there. But instead of putting the dishes in the washing machine or just leaving the dishes out for the cleaners to take care of, they put dirty dishes back in the cupboard. So dirty cups, dirty utensils, they literally went through the time to put all that stuff back dirty. So that was the pretty unpleasant surprise to come back to. That was another client story that I have. Just sometimes crazy stuff happens in Airbnbs. But
what if someone won't leave?
Well, it depends on what. Actually, no, it doesn't depend on what state they're in. If they don't leave, then you can have them escorted out of the property. They're short-term rentals, right? If it was a long-term rental, if they stayed in some states, at least 30 days, then different rules apply. That's where squatters come into play. But as long as it's less than that, it's a short-term stay. So there can't be any squatters, and you can just get them escorted off the property.
Well, that's good. But you'd have to, I guess, yeah. So if you have a short-term rental and you're skirting the law, let's say you're in a major city like New York, wherever, now you're screwed. So I guess that's the downside, if you're not supposed to have one in the first place and then that happens, what do you do?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, to be honest, though, I mean, there's ways around it. I don't think that this is necessarily a great place to lead the conversation, honestly.
Sure.
But technically, I don't think that a police, if they came and was going to escort someone off a property you own, they wouldn't be like, is this a short-term rental? Technically, at that point, it's just about the fact that it's a property you own and someone is in there that shouldn't be in there. So that enough should be enough to get the person off the property.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, very good. So do you work with people that are new to STRs and to real estate investing, or it's more seasoned people? And if so, how do people reach out to you for help?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I like to do for people is just being more of a connector. So I don't really work with them directly, but I have a lot of clients who specialize in all types of real estate: Airbnb, short-term rentals, fix and flip, mid-term rentals, long-term rentals, wholesaling, you name it, they can help you out. So if you reach out to me at The Athletic CEO, is my tag, at The Athletic CEO on Instagram. Just let me know you listen to the podcast and you're interested in getting into real estate, and I'll be happy to connect you with one of my clients who can teach you out.
And the name of your podcast, I mean, do you have a podcast yourself as well, or it's just the company?
So my company's name is The Virtual Legacy, and brand, podcast, everything is just The Legacy Builders.
Okay, good. I wanted to get the name of that. So people can listen to the Legacy Builders, learn even more, and then they can contact you if they're interested.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, very good. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your wisdom and your help, John. It's been great.
Thank you. Yeah, you've been awesome as well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.